me the map. According to the map, it must be there.
Maybe the storm put us, of course.
No. This map is upside down.
Glad you can join another LeBuck's Ring episode. We are going to start the skull compositing, so this is going to be a long and tough one, so stay motivated.
Let's do that.
So before we start, I advise you to do breakouts. To do so, just activate the saver you see here and make sure you set your path. You can simply reuse my path or file names, just make sure you have created the same folder structure. I won't cover the saver settings as there is not much to cover. If you have questions though regarding the savers, you can always ask me. Once you have activated your savers, make sure the render range is set to the full range, then hit the render button. Keep in mind that although you can render multiple savers simultaneously, it is not recommended to do so. The best way to render out all savers is to save individual comps with individual savers activated or deactivated, and then use the network render manager to batch render those. Batch render.
Hey waitress, bring that batch of rum, will ya?
Yeah, bring that son of a bitch.
Once you have rendered out all savers, bring them back in using a loader and deactivate the savers again. You also need to hook the loaders into the output nodes right beneath it. If you have done all that, you're all set.
So let's dive right into it. Hey.
The first thing we need to do is the earlier explained alpha divide. Now when I say alpha divide, you might think of this one here. But there's actually another way of doing the alpha divide operation. The method I'm going to show you has proven for me to be the most reliable one when working with multiple passes. But let me show you the difference. Come closer. I will be using the goal pass. So I hook the goal pass into the alpha divide and you will see the outline changing. Now do me a favor. Press A to view the alpha. Notice something? The alpha is not affected. It affects only the color channels. Now let me show you another method. For that we need a boolean tool. Again, I'm going to hook in our goal pass. Now let's compare this. I put the alpha divide node into the left viewer and the boolean into the right viewer. I select the boolean tool and set the operation to divide. In this state, the boolean is dividing all channels by themselves. Hence we get this white result.
What does that mean? Why is this white?
I think it's...
Shut up, you son of a bitch. I know.
Remember the alpha divide video? Any color value divided by itself equals 1. In Fusion 1 equals 255 in Photoshop. Okay, but let's move on. Let's say we want to have the same result as with our alpha divide. To do so, we simply set all color channels to alpha foreground, FG, and the alpha to do nothing. And if we take a look at the alpha channels, you see that it is now identical to the alpha divide tool. Okay, and what I want to do now is, I want to divide the alpha as well. So I set the alpha in all channels, and now the alpha is also divided. You know that after the divide process, we do the color corrections and stuff, and then we would multiply the alpha back using the alpha multiply node. With the boolean tool, it doesn't work though, because the alpha multiply assumes that we have the multiplied alpha still stored in the alpha channel. However, we also divided the alpha. I can show you by adding an alpha multiply. Nothing happens.
Nothing happened. Strange. What's going on here? He's trying to fool us, this fool.
So for this method, we need the mat control node. We will have to set the operation here. But first we need the original multiplied alpha. For that I've created a second output right next to the gold out here. Skull alpha. So we take this output into the green slot of the mat control, and then in the mat combine dropdown, you choose combine alpha. Bang!
Bang, 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 bang.
We have the same result as we have with the alpha divide. Okay, and to multiply the alpha back, you can simply check this checkbox here.
Perfetto.
Let me say one more time. This step is crucial if you want to keep your perfect anti-aliasing, and neglecting this step will lead to outline problems.
Oh, yeah, or you get more rum. Then all the outline's gonna blend anyway.
You fool.
Okay, so let's start with the alpha divide of our passes. I'm gonna go back to the first pass. In this pass we have the skull and the background. So we won't need the alpha divide here. Next pass, the shadow bottom. Here we go. Drop in a boolean and set the operation to divide, then alpha FG in all channels. Perfect. I copy this boolean over to the next pass. For the next pass, let me quickly show you what I got going on here. You see I have a gamut here. The reason for that is rather creative, as all images created in Fusion are automatically linear. But this skull looked bleached out as we are viewing it with a LUT, a lookup table. But in the 3D viewport, the lookup table was turned off. So I added this gamut because I knew it would give me the same result as in the 3D viewport. I could have done this with a simple gamma correction as well. So between this gamut and the output node, you want to shift insert the divide. Now, as said before, this one here has to stay untouched. It is our original alpha, which we need to multiply the alpha back later. In order to not get confused, I copy the alpha to all color channels. You can do so by simply setting alpha in all channels. Now it's clear that this is our alpha. Next pass, skull reflection. Paste in the divide, view it to make sure it worked. Next, the skull ambient occlusion. Here it gets a little tricky. Do you remember that we doubled the resolution for the ambient occlusion pass? Let me show you why we did that. The ambient occlusion's anti-aliasing is unfortunately not good. That's why I suggest to render it without anti-aliasing, but in double resolution or triple ripple.
Triple ripple, a new word.
Or triple resolution. I then resize it down to the composition's resolution, which results in getting anti-aliasing due to filtering. And although this looks good, comparing the alpha to the original alpha shows that there is something different. We need to fix this, because this will get you into trouble later.
Hey, but we are pirates. We love trouble.
I can give you trouble.
Now there are several ways how you can fix this. Let me show you one of them. After the loader, drop in a blur and give it a slight blur. Not too much. You don't want to blur the details out. We just want to extend the pixel a little bit. We could do some masking, but in this case, it is fine like this. Then bring in a boolean and grab a copy of our original alpha. Paste it in as an instance. Then drop in a mat control in which we hook in the alpha. And just like before, we set the mat combine to combine alpha and check pre-multiply.
Here says post multiply.
If we compare the alpha again, you see it's 100% identical. And we fixed the alpha. And with the fixed alpha, we can now do the divide process. Next pass, the skull lighting pass. Here as well, paste in the divide. Next, darken eyes. Next, normal pass. Here we do not need the alpha divide, simply because we're gonna use this to do relighting. Next pass, the skull drops back. Paste in the divide. Good, we finished the preparation, so let's move on and do the compositing. The area where we do that is here. Again, if you zoom in, you will see the names of the boxes. First, the skull gold out, skull reflect, and the skull lighting. I navigate back and grab those bloody passes. The gold, the reflect, and the lighting. I navigate to our area of interest and paste them in as instances. Ctrl-Shift-V. I put them into their boxes and always make sure the wireless nodes are still fed. First, I want to combine these two images. Since this is a reflection, we need to use the add operation. Add a boolean tool and set it to add. Important, set the alpha to do nothing, to leave the alpha alone. Now you can see the reflection is very strong, but since we work in float, all information is still there. Simply use a brightness contrast to lower the gain. Perhaps 0.1 or less. Hold Ctrl to fine-tune it, about 0.06. There, this looks much better. Next we add the lighting pass. Copy over this boolean, hook it in and view it. Here you can see a box that says Combine Lighting Occlusion. What I want to do here, I want to exclude the light from areas where it should be dark, like the eyes for example. For that we can use a combination of the ambient occlusion and the shadow bottom pass. So I'm going to grab a copy of the ambient occlusion and the shadow pass. In the left box, the ambient occlusion, and in the right box, the shadow bottom. To combine shadows, we use a boolean set to multiply. Now with the shadow bottom, I use a light to illuminate the bottom, which inverted can be used as a shadow. To invert this image, again use a boolean, set to negative and view it. This time set the alpha to black. If you take a look at the inverted image, you can see it looks very hard. However, again, if you press the normalize button, you can see that we have all information. So you think by adding a brightness contrast and simply reduce the gain or brightness, you will get the smooth shadows.
Wrong.
Well, this time we need to do something differently. First, clip the blacks. Then decrease the gamma. It becomes smoother.
What's he doing now? I think he's showing us what happens if we don't clip the blacks.
So just now I realized that I used the ambient occlusion instead of the skull occlusion pass. I know I should have given it different names, but you know what? Let's see the difference. I copy this boolean over here. And then I combine it with the shadows. Okay, as expected, it got a little too dark. So we better get the other occlusion pass. I apologize, but this is a good example of what happens in real-life productions. And also how easy you can fix those things in Fusion.
Making some excuses again right there.
Hey, show some respect, man.
The right pass is called skull occlusion. I navigate back and exchange the ambient occlusion pass with the skull occlusion pass. Well, this looks better. Good. At this point, you saw something suspicious. Here, a pixel is missing.
Where did it go?
Well, let me show you the values at the bottom. You can see these are very strange values here. This is a common problem when working with float and needs to be fixed. In order to fix this, we simply add a brightness contrast and rename it to Fix. And then simply check Clip Blacks. Next, I want to use the occlusion on the reflections as well, to kind of reduce the reflections in the shadow area. I paste it in and insert it after the brightness contrast. Then I hook in the shadows. View it, and you see it gets slightly darker. Another multiplication I want to do is here. I paste in a boolean tool, which is set to multiply, and hook in the shadows and view it. Of course, it's much too strong. To adjust that, I use a brightness contrast. So here I did a little mistake. I didn't notice it while recording the video. So unfortunately I have to continue with the wrong one. But here I'm showing you actually how it's correct, how you can fix it. So please do it like so. And I will continue with the, wrong one. Again, I crank up the brightness to 0.31 and bring up the highs. Perhaps 0.51. Don't forget to clip the blacks again and the whites. Now what happens to the background does not matter as we use the divide process on our main passes. Now if you come closer, closer, and compare those passes, you can see the alpha is different. This is a perfect case to show you how to pinpoint problems in Fusion. So I navigate back to the renderers and check those passes. The shadow pass has the same problem as the ambient occlusion. I rendered double resolution and resized it down. Now before dividing the alpha, it's almost not visible. However, after dividing, you can clearly see the problem. Let's fix this. So we use the same blur trick that we used before. Since I did breakouts, I want to temporarily use the render output again. You don't have to do it, but I just want to be sure, so I hook it into the divide and do the fix. So because the skull occlusion was rendered using the software renderer and the main passes with an OpenGL renderer, the filtering is different. The software renderer uses a fixed filter. So to be on the safe side, I do the same blur fix with this pass as well. Now we have a perfect match. And now we can hook in our breakouts again. Okay, I'm gonna move back to our comp section. Now it seems that we have fixed the alpha issues, but we won't be able to tell for sure as we are still working with the divided images. So let's jump right to the multiply process. For that we move over to the box that says alpha multiply. Right there. Drop in a matte control and let's grab our original alpha. Move back and paste in an instance. And I hooked the ring into the background slot and the alpha into the foreground slot. And just like before, combine alpha and check post multiply. I realized a slight difference with the anti-aliasing, so I went back to the areas where we did the blur fixes. And I found that turning the matte control of the shadow bottom pass off gives a better result. Now I'm not quite sure at the moment what's the reason for that, but we might get to it later once we combined all passes. For now, please turn it off and let's continue.
Not there.
Navigate to the skull ambient occlusion out and the skull floor reflect out box. The floor reflect we're gonna do later. We will do a very nice little trick. You will like it.
Yeah, that would be a saucy wench.
Okay, this time let's get the right ambient occlusion pass. This one. Grab a copy and move it back into our box. I'm gonna bring in a color correction, which I will drive using a mask derived from the ambient occlusion. I really like to use the ambient occlusion that way instead of just slapping it on like it is. Make sure to set the mask to choose the red, green or blue channel. Again, red, green or blue doesn't really matter as long as the image is black and white. I'm also gonna invert the result. I want to darken some areas a bit. So I bring the gain down to 0.457 and always check the difference with Ctrl P. Additionally, it's a good idea to blur the ambient occlusion just a little bit. You can also soften the mask instead, but it might give you a different result, so be careful. So you know what, let's bring another color correction right after the multiply occlusion. I want to do a temporary color correction to set the basic mood of the skull. It's nothing final and can be changed at any time. Now you can see that the shadows are really dark, perhaps 100% black. I don't like 100% blacks. So in the shadow tab, I bring them up a tiny bit using the lift. About 0.007. Very careful with the lift.
Yeah.
Then I add a slight greenish tint by increasing the gain to 1.6. Next, let's add the raindrops onto our skull. We need the skull drops out and the skull drops back. But the skull drops out you won't find in our render section. Instead, we need something else. Come on, let's navigate back and let me show you. We need the skull normal and the skull spec out.
Not there.
I know you're confused now, but hold on for a second. So back at our boxes, we put the skull spec into here and the normal belongs down here. And here's where we are going to create the pass used up there in the skull drops out. Now it wasn't too confusing, was it? Let's do this right away. View the normal pass, and I'm gonna get rid of this fella here. And we will use this normal pass to do some sort of relighting. To use relighting, we need to put the normal information into the normal channels. To do this shift, what do we need?
I know! The Boolean tool! Shut up, you son of a bitch! You're disturbing my contemplation! What? Contemplation. What is that? Concentration. Concentration. I think that was German.
So yeah, we need the Boolean tool. If you would check the channels for a moment, you will see that there are no normal channels. Select the Boolean tool and in the auxiliary channels, check enable extra channels. In the XYZ normal, we choose red, green, blue. Again, if you check the channels now, we have the normals embedded. And the fun part comes now. By adding a shader tool, you can do some relighting action. Another thing I want to do is, I want to get rid of the alpha. So I bring in a merge, hook the normal into the foreground and a background tool into the background slot. The color of the background I set to 0.5, 0.51, which gives you a normalized value. I replace the normal and see we got rid of the alpha. I move the shader and the Boolean tool over and add a color correction. I give it a tint of 0.487, a strength of 0.465. And then I reduce the gain to 0.038, something like this. Again, we're going to darken the areas that lie in the shade. For that, we use the shadow floor. Let's grab our instance and bring it over to our box. Let's combine it and let's use a merge this time. The raindrops into the background and the floor shadow into the foreground. As we want to do a multiply operation, I reduce the gain to 0.64. Nice. This one is ready to go into its output node. The wireless node is already fed, or it should be. So let's copy it up into its box. Next, I want to add the raindrops to our skull. We do this using, again, a Boolean tool. Set it to add and alpha to do nothing. The same for the drop spec. Now this is a little too much, so we want a mask that restricts the specular to the raindrops only. So drop in 2 masks. Create a router and hook it into the mask. View it. Set the channel to red. Or you know what, this time let's choose green instead. I put the low to 0.52 and the highs to 0.63. I also soften it a tiny bit, really just a tiny bit. 0.00019.
Hey, couldn't you just round it up to 2?
Yeah, well, perhaps you could. And for the other mask, we set the channel to red, and the lows to 0.523, and the highs to 0.635, and soften it to 0.00019 again. We can also darken this image with the shadow bottom. I create a router down here, then drop in another mask, and from the router, hook it into the mask, which again we set to red, and this mask into this mask. And we set the paint mode to multiply. And now that we have this mask, we will use it on the skull drop spec. Hook it into the channel Boolean. And now it is still not too spectacular. So let's bring this further. Yeah. I drop in a displace tool and branch out from the color correction. And from our normal path, we go into the displace. Now this is not quite what we want. The type of displace is set to radial, in this case rather useless. However, if we switch to XY, we can take advantage of the color information of our normal map, whereas red displaces along the X-axis and the green along the Y-axis, the vertical axis. Now strangely enough, if you change the refraction values, the whole skull is moving. You could fiddle around with the offset or do another little confusion trick. Yay! If you add a brightness contrast in between and change the brightness to -0.5, the normal values get normalized and you won't have this moving skull anymore. I set the X refraction to 0.026 and the Y to 0.033. Again, this is very strong, but we can again utilize our previously created mask and hook it into the displace. You have just discovered the beauty of nodal-based workflow.
Did you just say beauty? Sounds like a girl.
See how we could utilize all the nearby stuff that we created so quickly and efficiently. Okay, to your taste you can reduce the displace effect, and yeah, I always overkill it. I'm a pirate, so... But I need to show you something. Come closer, man.
Closer.
See those holes here? They are created by the displace. You cannot deactivate the alphas in the displace because then the holes become black. A simple trick is to merge your displaced image on top of the undisplaced image. That way, you will cover the holes with the original color. Very simple and effective. I add another color correction, again driven by the drops mask, and we can try to brighten or darken the drops a bit. So let's go up and see what happens with the speck out. Perhaps this is too strong here, so I add a brightness contrast and reduce the gain to 0.257. That's good to go. Hook this into our output and then let's combine it with the background already. Okay guys, so this concludes the first part of the skull compositing. My name is Vito, I'll see you soon. Until then, enjoy what you're doing.
Wanna say yo ho ho, 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 yo ho ho. Why?